In this video, we are going to cover the benchmarking module within CostrixIQ. The benchmarking module can be found the benchmarking tab within the menu. So the intent of the benchmarking module is to work with a client really early in their project lifecycle. If the project's at a stage where it's quite developed, you'd be moving straight into the cost planner. The benchmarking module is to be used when you're working pre-business case or evaluating different scenarios with a client very early or their stakeholders. And you want to be using benchmarking data to advise where you think project values and individual buckets of project value should be allocated based on client requirements. So the tool is to be used very, very early. And then once the project progresses, you would load your benchmarking into the cost planner to start cost planning properly. So this is the benchmarking template and dashboard. This is your working space where you do all of your benchmarking. Just go through the layout of it. So there's an area to put in project metrics. There's an area to enter in all of your standard analysis. So if a project was a typical project, all of the information would be entered into here and benchmarked within here. There's an area to include unique items or non-standard items. So we can build that in. So we would start with our base. This is what we would typically see. And then anything unique that would sit outside of that model, you could add in there. And if a client wanted you to also track some of their own metrics that may be outside of the contract sum, but still wants to report on it, there is an area to add in the client information as well. So from there to the right, we have our dashboard analysis, all of our financial analysis. And then the system has been built where you would build up to 10 models. So these models are customizable. You name your model. The structure of your model is the same as the structure of your template, but your proportion of where you think those costs will be allocated will vary from model to model, as will the specification of what is in that or the assumptions that are within that. So there may be a project in this example where it's a high fit out project and partitioning and sealing account for about 15% of the allocation in a benchmarking level, or there might be a project where it's very open plan and therefore partitioning might only account for 9% of the allocated level, and maybe there's a higher proportion on joinery or workstations or the like. And so the system, you would build out your models. As I said, there's the ability to build out 10 different models within the system, pre-populated, preset, ready to load into the benchmarking module, and then you start playing with it. So let's start by entering in some information. So in the document, we have our sell side analysis and we have our cost side analysis. And so this is in line with everything else within CostrixIQ. There is a sell side and a cost side. So what we're going to do is we're going to fill out the sell side. We're then going to analyze the cost side. And then from there, we can add in our unique items and by client items. We will analyze the metrics to make sure we're happy with it. And then from there, we can create an external report that we can either just issue to the client or work with the client on. And when we're ready, we can also transfer this benchmark into the cost planner for further and full reporting and snapshotting for the changes log and starting the cost planning process. So on this project, we're going to set a target gross profit of 30%. This might be a 2,000 square meter project. And the target dollars a square meter at a benchmark level, we might say is $2,000 a meter. So the system automatically calculates, okay, the target project value is $4 million. And so from there, what we're going to do is we're going to apply the model we think best suits this project. Now we can adjust this model after the fact, but we're going to pick the model that best suits. So let's just pick benchmarking model A, standard fit out, 750 to 1500. We're going to apply that model. You can see all our models come up. We're going to apply that model. It says, do you want to include the model? Yes. It also asks, do you want to bring the specification along with the model, or do you want to keep whatever is there? We're going to say yes, bring the specification. And straight away you see that that benchmark model has been loaded into the system. It's loaded the percentage allocation and it's loaded the specifications. Now, if you needed to create a very high level benchmarking cost plan off just a couple of metrics and applying some logic that was preset, you could load this cost plan, this benchmark into the cost planner at this point in time and create a full cost planning reporting package, 5-10 pages of reporting, and issuing that to the client. So there is the possibility of creating quite a detailed cost plan with all of the underlying assumptions and thinking within it in a matter of 5 minutes, based off a couple of high-level assumptions. Now, what most people will do is they'll start analyzing this model to go, do I think this is right based on the individual circumstances of the project? And what we're going to do now is we're going to adjust the model. So firstly, I just want to highlight a couple of things. While we have our cost plan sections, the way we break our project up, we can also report to the client on benchmarking categories. And so these benchmarking categories are customizable by the user. You can add whatever categories you like. And so, for instance, I want to combine the professional fees, whether they're in-house or external, under the one section called consultants and authority fees. I want to bring in my hydraulics, my HVAC, my electrical data, and I want to understand that as a building services. I want to understand my built environment, my workstations, furniture, FF&E, and so forth. So you can create whatever benchmark categories you like. So while you can report based on the typical section headings, you can also report and analyze based on these larger categories. And an example of this may be, we believe typically building services make up 35% of a typical project. So when we run the benchmarking, we can look at, well, what does building services currently benchmark to? Is it about right? And we'll look at that when we look at the metrics over to the right. So we've loaded our percentage allocation. It's assumed the 30% margin. And so it's automatically loaded what our target sell should be per package, and also what our target cost should be to deliver the margin level required. So we may look through this and go, okay, 120 for in-house professional services, that's probably a little bit too high. I think we're at 80. So we can either adjust the percentage, adjust the dollars a square meter, or adjust the total sell. So I may want to drop the 80 down, the 120 down to 80. I enter that in, the percentage is adjusted, the dollars a square meter is adjusted, and I'm showing 80,000. The system's gone red, just to show that we haven't completely allocated the 100% of the standard. Now that won't stop you from doing anything, but it's just a warning to say, hey, you haven't allocated 100%. Because we've dropped $40,000 off this number, we may be able to put $40,000 elsewhere. We may actually go, this client, the joinery is important to them. We're going to add that 40,000 into the joinery. So we're going to increase the allocation of joinery. And you can see what's the master cell and what's the slave. So you can see these underlines mean we're using the percentage to allocate the total cell, and any item that's underlined in the total cell, it means that is the master, and these numbers are reflecting that. So you can see very quickly we've allocated the $4 million target value across all of our packages. We would have come through and adjusted it. We may say there is, floor coverings are light. So instead of a 5% allocation, we probably only need a 2% allocation. Again, it's adjusted the figures. Or we may say $50 a square meter on flooring. So you can work on percentage of project, dollars a square meter, or absolute values. You can see we're currently at 3.9 million versus the 4. So we have $100,000 of standard allocation to put in. We may go and put that back into the joinery and make that 540,000. So you can see we've increased the joinery package in this model, and this may be based on a number of discussions or assumptions or workshops that you've had with the client, understanding that's going to be important to them. So we've allocated our unique items, but there may be certain items within the project that sit outside. In this example, they may go for a single floor or they may go for 2 floors. If they go for 2 floors, they're going to include a staircase. And that you may call as a non-standard item. And so under my non-standard analysis, I might put in staircase. I might say, look, a typical staircase, let's allow $500,000 for a staircase. It automatically says it's $250 a meter, or 12.5% of the target value. You would then add in staircase with features, and then you would add in whatever specification you're allowing under that, or your underlying assumptions. I'm just going to type in some information there. Now it does say what is the benchmark category. So it's built environment. So I have a category called non-standard built environment. And it also says if you're going to include this into the cost planning section when we report, what section do you want to include this within? So within staircase, I might include it in my building works for now. I can create a section called staircase if I wanted, but let's include this in building works. So I will come in and I will select my building works line. And then you would go through and plan others. You may go, we're going to try and make a margin of, well, we'll look at the cost side in a moment. And then the client may say, I also need to allocate $500,000 based on IT infrastructure upgrades, which are going to be sitting outside of the contract, but we want to capture it in our overall reporting. So we might say IT system upgrades. And the client may say, I need $500,000 for that. So we'll put in $500,000. Now by client items, there is no allocation of cost. These are just tracking. We may track under the client categories, that might be an information technology cost to them. And when we load it into the cost planner, we're going to load it into the section called by client. So now we've loaded our sell side, we're going to analyze our cost side. So we've preset our margin level to 30 because that's what we think, that's our target. But we may come through and go, look, we're not going to be able to make that margin level consistently across the project. Workstations, it's probably more going to be a 10% margin package. It updates the markup. We may say chairs, we can mark them up at 10%. If I use the markup, it adjusts the margin. It adjusts the target profit. It adjusts the target cost. We may come through and say audio visual, it's a $300,000 package. We want to profit $100,000 out of that. It will adjust markup, margin, and target cost. Or likely you could say fire services is a $140,000 package. We're going to target a cost of $90,000 on that. And it will adjust what markup, what margin, what profit you will have. So you can adjust either markup, margin, the target profit, or the target cost. And the system updates the percentages accordingly. So from there, we might look at the staircase and say, look, we think we can mark up the staircase at 25%. It will load that. And so now we've looked at our sell side, we've projected our cost side, we now want to analyze the project. So we can come across and we can see total project sum would be 5 million. That includes by client items. The contract sum would be 4.5, which is a combination of the 4 million that we've loaded in a standard format plus the 500,000 of unique items. Shows what the target cost should be. And based on this model, that is the gross profit we would be achieving at this model. Some packages would be meeting targets. Some packages would be bringing us down. And this is the overall. So we can come back into the model and say, actually, we're going to probably have to mark this up at 40%. And some of these other packages, we may need to go higher. So we might come into electrical and data, try and make a 40% margin on that. And we might try and make let's pick another large package, the joinery item. Let's try and make a 45% margin on that. And so now you can see quite quickly, we come back to our model. We're very close to the 30%. So we can come in and say, let's look at our prelims. Our prelims, let's try and make a 50% markup. We're now in the green. This is the pathway. This is the profit plan in order to hit our margin based on a number of assumptions, including non-standard items. And so we can now see this would be the typical spend. This would be our target cost. If this project was to proceed as is, this would be the target cost per package. So it gives the team a target to start with. We can see our unique items, what we'd be selling them for, our target cost and what we're designing to, and we're tracking by client items. We've undertaken our analysis. We're happy with our initial benchmarking. And now we can create an external report to present this to the client. So now we're going to produce the external report. At the top of the screen, you can see a button for Create External Report. We're now going to run that external report. It says, do you want to create the external benchmarking report? We're going to click yes, and the system will now go and create that report. Okay, so the system has now created the external benchmarking report. So what it has done is created a completely clean Excel file that can be issued to the client with 3 tabs. And so what it is doing, it is mimicking the functionality we have in the benchmarking module within CostrixIQ. We're now exporting this into an external file. The functionality remains the same, but now it is just showing cell side numbers. So this is now a report that can be issued to the client. It can either be issued to the client like this. So we have a benchmarking summary tab. We have a benchmarking details tab. So we have our standard analysis, our non-standard analysis, and our by client items. And it's also loaded our benchmarking categories. And so this can be issued to the client as is, printed and sent, either sent as Excel or sent as a combined PDF. Or you could send it as an Excel file for the client to play with. Or you could actually create this, go and sit with your clients and benchmark the project with them, because the functionality works the same. So just to give you a high level overview, we have our metrics that we're working to. We have our total analysis. You can see our dollars per square meter as a total project. Our standard analysis, we can see very clearly the building services make up 28.5% of the project. Built environment makes up 41.5%. Workstations make up 16.5%. Now we may say that's probably a little bit too high for workstations and low for building services. So we may have adjusted that before we loaded it, or we could adjust that with the client in this document. We have our non-standard and our by client items. And then when we go into the system, we have the same functionality where we have our section headings, we have our benchmarking categories, we have our specifications, and we have our percentage of target dollars a square meter in total. We have master and slave cells. So I can see the $80,000 is dictating the percentages here. So I can issue this as produced, or I can actually sit with the client and go, do we think we're going to spend $540,000 on joinery? Let's bring that down. We're a little bit over budget. Let's bring that back to $450,000. So I can bring that to $450,000. The system automatically recalculates the other cells. It's updated the front cover page. You can see our values are coming down. I may come in and say white goods at $40,000. That's way too high. We're only going to spend $15,000. We're currently using the percentage. Let's override it to be $15,000. It's automatically updated the percentage of project, the dollars a square meter. the workstations furniture package would have been updated. You can see we're now down to 15% of the project value. We may say building services looks a little bit too low. So we want to come into our building services, maybe heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. That's too low on a project of this size. This needs to be more like $550,000 a meter. For mechanical, we might want to increase electrical to 400,000. And now you can see as a percentage of project that building services has now increased, as has our project values. We're probably over allocating slightly. We're $235,000 over allocating on the standard. So we may say, where can we save that $235,000? We may bring down partitioning by 100,000. May bring down strip out by 60,000. We may bring down the construction management and prelims by 40,000. And so you're benchmarking with the client to bring that number and that model really to where we think it's going to be. And so this is a document you could issue as a blank template to the client and let them play with it, or it's something you can walk the client through. If they want to add their own categories, they can add a category in here, call it custom category. We can then come in here and let's allocate the construction management and prelims to the custom category. And now you can see on the front page, we have a custom category that's been pulled out. So completely, it's a report, but it is also a live working template. We decide that we want to spend a little more dollars a square meter, we can increase that, all the numbers update, and you can remodel. So while this is an external report, it is also an external working model with all the functionality that you have within CostrixIQ, but just showing the sell side numbers. So from here, let's say we're at a scenario where the client says, yes, we're going with this benchmarking model. This is the starting point of our project. We may want to produce a cost plan along with the external report. And so now we can transfer this model and all the lines within it into the cost planner. Remember, we're currently showing a gross profit of 30.12 overall. So we can now click transfer to cost planner. The system says, do you want to transfer into the cost planner? Yes. It then says, which sector would you like to export the benchmark into 1 to 20? Let's just enter this into sector 1, which actually we haven't named yet. And so let's go back and name it. So I'm just going to hit cancel. I'm going to come in and name sector 1 benchmark. 2,000 a meter. Let's go back into the cost planner. That's transfer. Yes. Let's load it into sector 1. And the system is now loading that benchmark into the cost planner. So the system now tells us the benchmarking data successfully loaded into the cost planner. We click OK. We can see very clearly, we'll go to the cost planning tab. We now have a project sitting at 30.12% gross profit. As shown on the dashboard, it has our cell number, our cost number, has the by client items, total project number, all the analysis, dollars a square meter. You can see under each heading, there's some quantities added in throughout, as well as some specifications. Now, it has our preset template lines already loaded, but right now we just want to look at the benchmarking line items. So we're going to close our cost planner up, and you can now see it has loaded under each of the sections a line called benchmark standard allocation. It's loaded the cost, the cell, the markup, and the specification that was set in the benchmark. And it's done that for all of the items. All the standard allocations have been added in. Now, we also had a line item for a non-standard item called staircase. So the staircase has been included in the building work section because we asked for it to be included in the building work section. And where the standard allocation has been allocated as benchmark standard allocation, this is benchmark non-standard dash staircase. So it's highlighted, it's a non-standard item. It's brought through the description, the $500,000 with the 40% markup, with the specification. It's even brought through the by client items, so benchmark by client, IT system upgrades, and it's included the sell side of those. And so our cost plan has been automatically loaded with this under the benchmark sector. Now I may come back into the benchmark, load a new benchmark in, transfer it to the cost planner, and load it into sector 2. And so I can have multiple benchmarks in my sector. I can open up another sector called benchmark 2, and I can have what would benchmark 2 look like. But in this instance, we're just going to show the one benchmark. And so now that this has been loaded in, I can create a full cost planning report off this. And so along as well with my external report, I might want to produce a cost plan. So now we're going to produce a cost plan based on the benchmark model. So I might come in, I might say, let's include a cover. Let's include the summary report. I'll include the details. There are no options right now. I'll include the specifications, and I would have gone in and updated my exclusions and so forth. So I'm now going to create this version of the cost plan reflecting the benchmark. So the system has now created a full cost plan with all the benchmarking data. So this report, again, can be issued to the client with the external report or separately. We have a cover page. We have our summary report with all of our headings totaling up to the 4.5 mil, plus the 0.5 mil by client, totaling a total project of 5 mil. If they want to understand, we can see we have some standard allocations within. If you had a lot of unique or non-standard allocations, you might use this report a little bit more because you can see the breakdown of costs in here. So under building works, it's over 2 pages. Over building works, you see the standard allocation and the non-standard allocation, which is making the total. Importantly, it's brought through the specifications. So imagine producing a report with all the underlying assumptions of the workplace model that's preset. So this could be a 5-page assumptions report. And then it's also brought in my exclusions and clarifications. So I could very quickly create a 5 to 10-page cost plan showing my standard allocation and all the specifications that sit within it and issue that to the client. Once we've created our cost plan and our external benchmarking report, the client may now say, we're ready to start the process of the project. And so we may want to take a snapshot of the benchmark so that we have a starting point of the project that we can compare against for all future and subsequent changes. So we're now going to take a snapshot of the benchmark. We're going to come to the dashboard tab. We're going to take a snapshot. We're going to call it an external snapshot. The system has now taken a first snapshot of the project. You can see under the changes log, we have all of our section headings. We have our selling price, our by client items. Under the external notes, we may say this is the first benchmark that was agreed with the client. We may call this benchmark snapshot. And so it's a snapshot of the project, and that is now in the system ready to be compared against. And so an example of that, we're now ready to cost plan our project. So let's quickly go into cost planning the project and adjusting some of these lines. We won't do it at scale, just to show you how you would kick off the project from there. So now we're going to come into our cost planner. We're going to open up our lines. We may now start cost planning this project. We may now actually start pricing, if we hadn't already, our professional services or our third-party professional fees. Let's just use strip out as an example. And I may come in here and I'm going to throw some quantities out there. I'm going to just type in some information so I can see. So I'm going to type in man days. And so I'm going to remove my benchmarking line. And I'm now going to actually cost plan this up. So I might say we have 300 meters of that. We have 300 meters of that. We have 24 doors. I might come in and adjust my markup. I might want to sell this for $16.50 a meter. And so I'm cost planning my strip out section. And so from here, I may say, and I've done this on a project by project or section by section basis, I'll now close up my description, and I can see I'm still using some standard allocations, but under strip out, I'm now cost planning and using my lines, not the benchmark. And so I can create an external report that will show we're still using benchmarking numbers for some elements, we're now cost planning for others, or I remove all my benchmarking elements and I cost plan in full. And then I may take ready to issue that to a client. So I'm now going to take a snapshot to show the difference. So I'm now going to come back into the system. Might change this number so it's considerably different, just so we can see a large variation. And so I'm now going to take another snapshot. We're going to call this another external one. The system has automatically snapshotted it. It has seen there is a change in the strip out package. So it has automatically highlighted that. So where we were at 120 sell and 84 cost, we're at 97 cost and 140 sell. So automatically highlighted the change. I can then create an external report, but I might call this cost plan Rev A. And I might say cost plan updated with market intelligence for strip out package. I now may want to create an external report to the client. I'll show you what an external report looks like. So the external report has now created. You can see we have our benchmark snapshot and we have our cost plan revision A. It's highlighted the change to the client, and you are now on your way of cost planning, and every subsequent snapshot will build upon itself. But you will always have that benchmarking snapshot as the starting point to reference against. So that is a summary of the benchmarking module. To summarize, it's to be used very, very early with the client. You select which model you want to build in, and you can load different models in. So it's very easy to override a model, bring in a new model, and the system will update. So I've now loaded a new model that reforecasts the $4 million out. So you can play with your different models. You're working early with the client to understand the packages. You're working with big numbers here. You're analyzing on large elements to make sure that the project is roughly sitting in the right area. You're reporting that out to the client and potentially working with them on it. You're then transferring that to the cost plan to create all of your cost planning reports, and you're snapshotting benchmarks as a line in the sand as your starting point for projects. I hope that video was beneficial to you. If there is anything else you want to understand regarding the benchmarking module or CostrixIQ in general, please feel free to reach out.